go through stuff on the website?
We are live.
This is Senate Appropriations, January 9th. We're finished our BA testimony today. It was exciting. And we're going to just talk to JFO about the budget process. So this is kind of reminding the committee where we ended up last year and kind of how that sets up what we have to do this year. So I've asked JFO to kind of walk us through the process again, so we can just reset ourselves as we pass the Budget Adjustment Act and the budget. And they have kindly prepared a very exciting presentation.
It's very exciting. I'm going to make sure I can get the Zoom.
Are you excited to start?
So yeah, I can start. For the record, Emily Burns, the Joint Fiscal Office. Kind of going to go through a little, like, it's going to be a miscellaneous set of things, but just good context and background for you all before we dive into the meat of everything. Obviously, know Amy, brought Brady and James to also help. They have full. I hope they interrupt me if I forget something or get something wrong. Yeah, we're the budget team, right? Just be able to let me in. Hopefully I went into the right meeting. Oh no, I'm in the meeting. I'm not. See, it didn't work. I tried to join a waste meeting from this morning. It's okay. It's Friday. It's me.
Good.
Oh, there we go. That's good. They didn't let me in, so it's me.
We have an open invite for you.
So what are we going to talk about? We'll talk about, right, the budget generally, where things go, which should look very familiar. And then I did do a presentation yesterday for House Appropriations on the contingency that was part of last year's budget construct. So I feel like this is a good time to sort of walk you through that, what that was, what got spent from that contingency, and sort of how you access the money that was set aside last year, if and when it's time. And then completely switch gears and talk about the revenue forecast process, what that looks like, what's coming, what changed from January to July, and what to look. We're gonna have another emergency board in a week, so we'll have a new forecast for the budget and the budget adjustment.
Is it this week from today?
Week from today.
I should know that soon.
This is your.
Yes, I will see you in the ceremonial on Friday.
I think
November 10th.
just vote for it. That's whatever, regardless of the data.
The downgrade for Jim.
Yeah, no.
We say no to downgrade.
We'll see what happens. Okay, so legislative budget review for today. This is our little who we are, who we are. That we're not giving you policy recommendations, but just things to consider. So we'll talk about Act 27 a little bit, just a high level overview of last year's budget. What?
Which was the budget?
Which was the budget? It's a pretty low number budget. It's usually it's the last bill. So you got it out early last year. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna add several other.
We'll go through the website a little bit just to remind you of where to find resources as you're working through budgets. Go through an example calendar, right? It is not meant to be like when things are actually going to happen, but just sort of a general cadence of events related to the appropriations process. Go through the contingency appropriation, as I touched on earlier, and then revenues. So this is just, a reminder of when we're building the budget, how quickly the resources, start to disappear. We've presented this in a different way, but last year we appropriated out of the general fund about $2.5 billion. Right, when you account for what went to the teachers' retirement and OPEB, right? This is sort of one of the first things that we have to pay for. We got to pay those debts. We used about $225 million.
That was just teachers or teachers in statewide?
Teachers and teachers OPEBs. The state employees, it's a little more complicated because it's embedded in everybody's individual budget.
Right.
And it can hit the funding streams of those,
I guess I was thinking of the ADAT, or the catch up.
yeah, oh, yeah, we did. What's that? I think
I mean,
that's
it's in the budget.
yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
And then we've got, the general fund component that goes to Medicaid and for federal match approval commitment. $220 million for the Department of Corrections. The other human services things from the agency, what's mostly what Department of Children and Families does, almost $500 million. So that leaves $847 million, or about a third of the budget of general fund that's unallocated after you count for those things, right? And you've seen something similar to this before. You've come to the all member briefings, right? But that remaining is covering things like debt service and salaries and benefits, just the sort of base operating budget. Any changes in caseload in certain programs, new needs or expectations around just the world is ever changing and programs have to evolve. And our unanticipated issues, right? How is federal funding coming in? How are we to manage that as a state? And then other one-time investments that you have to consider. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list of one-time investments, but here are some big issues that often you're faced to make decisions around. So when we think about the budget, there's a lot of things on the JFO website. That's really helpful for you in doing your work. That's where we post everything. A lot of you are familiar. But where you go, when you go to the JFO website under this subjects section, is where you'll find there's a drop-down menu. One of them is appropriations and budget. And one of them is budget by department. Budgets by department is organized by government function, general government protection, human services, et cetera. And then when you click on those, you get the individual department and agencies specific budget submissions. And then under this FY26 section is where you'll find the budget document. In FY26 is where you'll find all those big spreadsheets, the final ones that we walked through a bunch last year, the bill itself. You go through those, but then if you go to conference documents, that's where we still have those. And then as the budget adjustment moves, we're going to add to this list is where we'll find budget adjustment changes, and it's organized the same way for 27. So right now, there's nothing there because there is no how. There's the governor's proposed. We don't have the governor's proposed documents. In 2 weeks, sort of less than 2 weeks, that's where we'll post governor's
The
stuff.
BEA will be obviously in FY26.
Correct. So yeah, those conference documents in terms of details are all right there. And so yeah, this is the list of those conference documents. I can click on the website and show them to you specifically if you want to go through like the specific things in the budget, but it's Friday afternoon, so this is how you get there. But sort of the one thing
I mean, is there something that you think would be helpful to look at, or just only if we had a question like, what did we do? And we'd want to go find it.
Yeah. But I think for now, one of the things that that we are looking at trying to change on our website is when these documents get posted, they get listed in the order in which we post them, and we have no control over how we order them. So they are not in a priority order necessarily. We're working on a website update for a couple of years, I don't know, maybe for soon, and that will hopefully change. But so these arrows will call out, right? So the report of the committee of conference, that's the final bill. You can also find that on the General Assembly website, but this will link you to that. The one at the very bottom, that's the web report that we walk through every time we look at the bill, right? That's a good reminder of sort of what happened at each stage, what changed.
Do we need statutory language to change calling it the web report?
No, you have a.
Better than.
Well, we'll take feedback. It is not listed anywhere specifically in statute.
It has nothing to do with the World Wide Web.
Okay, it has everything to do with
or spies. It has nothing to do with spider.
Nothing to do with spider. No. The highlights, so the document that gets passed out on the floor a lot, that sort of goes through, a quick refresher on, did we give money to that thing? How much did we spend on this? The highlight document's a good place to start. There's also there were two big spreadsheets that you'll see again this year, right? There's one that was base changes and one that was one-time changes. You've got the base increase is those changes, and then the one-time overview. It's the overview of those.
The links to those Excel spreadsheets, are they PDFs?
They're PDFs, the Excel spreadsheet, yeah. So yeah, if you want to jog your memory on where it went, how it changed, and where it landed, those spreadsheets are helpful. We'll have new budget adjustment spreadsheets soon. So is there anything else on the budget before I jump into hypothetical session calendar for illustrative purposes only? Great. Yeah, this is like for those at home who are watching, this is not meant to be like, and this is when things will move through the body, all subject to change. But generally, so in Amy put this together, if you have hard copies, or we'll get you hard copies. And there's one on the wall, but this is just like
Good time.
to remind everybody of how things move and where, when it becomes when the bill will likely hit this committee, right? So the first couple of weeks we have budget adjustment act. Next Friday, as we talked about, the emergency board will meet and officially adopt the new revenue forecast. Depending on what happens with the FY 2026 revenues as part of, they're going to adopt new revenue numbers for FY 26 and FY 27. Depending on what direction the FY 26 revenue forecast goes, that will impact the budget, the revenue available for the Budget Adjustment Act. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the governor is going to give his budget address, I believe, on the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Day holidays, to the General Assembly in January. And then the House Appropriations Committee will start their work on the budget. Hopefully around that time, hopefully around the end of the month, House Approps will be done with the BAA, and then it will come to here for you to deliberate and figure out what to do next with.
So they'll have it for 2 weeks after the emergency board.
Maybe. So I think what is they got to get it out of committee, and then they got to get it through the floor, right? So you have to sort of reserve a week for the floor, and
Does it go to other committees?
sometimes.
And the emergency board only has to vote on the projections or the revenue forecast for 27. And then if there's a change to 26, but most often if not, it should.
That's
Honestly.
it depends. Actually, it always changes. It's the magnitude and the direction that it's always.
They always tweak it a little bit.
There's always something going on somewhere in some part of something. Right, and it's both. The motion itself adopts the total number, but underlying that are sort of all of the what's purchased, what do we think purchase and use is going to do, what sales tax going to do, all of those components.
There's not two resolutions, one for the FY 26, one for FY 27.
It's one motion to rule them all.
Yeah.
So yeah, in theory, the House waits select the emergency board to move the Budget Adjustment Act. They'll have to react to that and then send it over to the Senate. Then you'll have time to take up the Budget Adjustment Act. And you'll have budget information, so you can start taking testimony from agencies, departments on the budget as well, depending on sort of how things are going with budget adjustment and how complicated it is, how much movement there needs to be. And that, so through February, it'll be continuing to move the Budget Adjustment Act and starting to take up the budget. The first week in March, right? That's the town meeting day. So we're all take a rest. But then right after town meeting day, that's typically when, and I know it hasn't been, the official crossover dates have not been established yet. History is indication of what is likely to happen. The policy crossover will be right after town meeting week, and then the money crossover will be the week after that. So theory, the House 2 weeks after town meeting will pass the budget. And then you'll have the end of March through part of April to work on the budget, to take it to the floor of the Senate. Then again, I don't know, Senator Western, you may know if there has ever been a situation where there is no conference committee on the Appropriations Act, but I think it's fair to assume that there will be a conference committee on the Appropriations Act.
There, it's never.
Yes.
And Senator Ruth, when is it normally around when committees, policy committees have to get money committees bills? Is that beginning of April?
I think it varies, like basically you set that deadline, you can communicate this. And to the whole Senate, but there's no hard and fast rule. But
Just as we get closer, we want to we figure out how much more time we need in the budget, say if you need your bills and if you want to be in, but
definitely.
So I mean,
Hard to get money if we spend it.
yeah, but is that kind of what this balloon was like,
Yeah.
to say like somewhere around your time is it different? Yeah.
so then Senate passes bill, committee of conference is formed. Budget's negotiated through what first weekish in May, and the General Assembly is budgeted for 18 weeks. So if we leave based on what the budget says, that would be around May 15th. So
I heard the pro tem guaranteed we'd be out by Mother's Day.
Absolutely.
I don't know what day Mother's Day is. So
I 10.
yeah, okay.
Is it 10th this year?
Thanks.
So yeah, that's again, for those watching at home, this is a hypothetical scenario that will likely not happen, but generally for, in your head about what the cadence might be, this is a pretty good,
Yeah, no, it's helpful.
Just for the record, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like last year where we're done with our work,
Right.
but the education work continues beyond the May 15th. Adjournment.
Can we make them work over the town meeting break?
right, I think it's helpful too for the, all of those steps will need to happen, right? So as things move, everything below it still has to happen. Any questions on that? Or jump to a completely different topic. Okay, great. So we'll talk about the contingent appropriations that were in the budget bill last year. This, I'm not going to talk. So this was the presentation I gave yesterday, but right, where does the money for the budget come from? We build the budget off of the anticipated revenues, mostly from the January adopted consensus revenue forecast. And then you account for if you're going to raise taxes or lower taxes or change things, we account for those things, but that's where the anticipated revenue comes from. And that's the sort of the North Star of what the budget, that's how we balance expenses and revenues. Now, as you are all aware of, I have been through this last April, right? Sometimes we get through closer to the end of the fiscal year and it's apparent that revenues are going to come in higher than the adopted forecast. But we don't budget them because it's not a guarantee. That's when the contingency list gets developed. And it's developed right in priority order, and the directions effectively that are given to finance management that if and when you go to, or not if, when you go to close the general fund, and if the revenues are higher than what's appropriated, here's what you do with those revenues, until you run out of revenue, or if you get through the whole list, then you follow the next steps.
Why aren't we allowed to call?
That was Kitchen. I think we could go back to it if we want. Gresham called it a waterfall the other day.
I think
It's because it says priorities.
No,
I guess it says priorities rather than looking at bottom line. It can cost.
Yeah.
But no. Still a waterfall.
Yeah.
There's like a water TLC.
Yeah. Don't go chasing
No.
those.
Yeah, I don't know.
Feel free to call it a waterfall or sing that song.
I'm gonna sing a song.
And so generally, we don't know the size of the contingency list until April, right? Which is when personal income taxes are due to the state, and that's when you really get the signal, right? A couple days after April 15th, once all of the people who have mailed their checks to the tax department have actually traveled through the postal service and made it to the department, and then they've cashed them, we know where that may land, right? And it's an estimate until the books are actually closed.
So is that meeting next week? You're gonna get the forecast on revenues? That's what, okay.
Yeah, no, but then we get then we get another one in July.
Did you all have?
All right, so we're gonna go back in time to this committee in April of last year and sort of the end of the legislative session. So in April of last year, we learned that, or it was apparent that the revenues were likely going to be over $100 million more than the consensus revenue forecast. And at the same time that happened, there were starting to be some uncertainties in the economy. Recall there were tariffs, there weren't tariffs, there were maybe tariffs, there were like it was a sort of, and the markets were reacting accordingly because there's a lot of uncertainty going on. And at the same time, the president had released a budget that had proposed to Congress to make significant changes to programs run by states. There was a lot of uncertainty as to what Congress was going to do with that document. So that was sort of, at the time, we knew we were going to have more money and there was a lot of just general uncertainty. So this committee, so one of the House Appropriations Committee really doesn't generally have a contingent list because they don't have the same revenue information that this committee does. So in your budget, you added a contingent list for the big bill, and then the conference committee amended that contingent list. And it was in the final version of the bill. So it was in section B 1101 subpart A. And I know this is a lot of words, but for what this section is doing is telling finance and management how to close the books specifically. And what order to do it in, right? So first, you're going to fill the stabilization fund. Then we had said $138 million, almost $139 million needed to be carried forward into fiscal 26 to be spent. We had a whole bunch of prior year revenue we anticipated in 26 to spend. So let's carry that forward so we can spend it. Then if there was anything else left after that, the contingent list, fund this list of contingent appropriations accordingly. And if there's anything left after that, then follow the standard statutory designations of undesignated revenue, which I'll go through what those are in a second. But so that sort of first part is putting funds into the stabilization reserve. And we budget for that, right? The stabilization reserve is supposed to be 5% prior year appropriations. When we're building the budget, we're always carrying a line that says, based on prior year appropriations, you need to assume you got to set aside X amount to get the stabilization reserve to that 5% level. So that's the sort of first thing that happens when they go to close the books.
And that can change with the VA.
Yes, it will change once the final appropriations are set. And that number, that actual, we're making an estimate based on prior year appropriations. Right, like last year we would have assumed, or no. Yeah, it depends on stuff. It's vetoed, right? There's sort of things that can.
And last year, the administration had something where they took out some spending.
Correct.
So that the 5% was a lower number that means.
Yes.
Freed up some money.
Yes, that can happen. And that because there was so much general fund for a couple of years of one-time money. That can reset.
So the 5% is of the budget that you are working on, or is it opposite the prior year's budget?
Of the prior year's
Of the
budget.
prior year's budget.
So in FY 26, it's 5% of FY 25 appropriations.
So, but if you change that point, the prior year's appropriations in the year you're in, you also change that, that's when it gets kind of.
So, and where it really gets weird. So for the BAA, right, we know what 25 was. That's closed. It's done. That's the number that it is. But 27, because you're still messing with 26,
I see.
we have to keep moving 27 until 26 is sort of, and because sometimes the big bill in the C, in section C, where we do current year changes, you may change it again, right? Like this fund adjustment, it may move again, so then we have to make sure. It's one of those, like, at the end where it's like, did we move that, did we fix that number, is that? So anyway. That can be a thing. So first, fill the stabilization reserve. And then per statute, we do, if there's anything left after the stabilization reserve, then there is 308C. And this is the section that says, if there's anything left, it goes into the balance reserve, which is also known as the rainy day fund. And that there's no minimum to that. It's just like anything extra that's left goes to the rainy day fund. And this is up to 10% of prior year appropriations. We're not anywhere close to 10% of prior year appropriations. So to the extent there's ever extra money, it would go here.
Interest earned in rainy day fund stays in the rainy day.
So the rainy day fund is not a fund per se, it's a reserve. So those monies are in the general fund. So the interest earned by having those funds reserved would be,
They don't stay in the reserve.
they would stay in the general fund.
Make it are usable for it.
Yeah, part of the revenue forecast includes a line for anticipated interest into the general fund.
Is that the same with the stabilization?
Yeah, that's part of it. So so it says, put it in the balance reserve, and then so part 3 says, of that money that you would put in the rainy day fund, this is where we have to take 25% and put it in the teacher's retirement, post-retirement adjustment allowance account, and 25% to the state employees pension fund. That we hear a lot about that happens here. So that's what this is, the language that triggers anything that's left, 50% of the rainy day fund, and then the remaining 50 is split half and half to those two funds. Right? So, but what that original directions language that I had in between those like two things, put carry forward some money and fund this contingent list, and then do the rainy day fund and the pension funds. So this is the contingent list that was in there. So there was $118 million in the contingent list at the end of last fiscal year. The first $8 million was transferred to the communications and information
Are you gonna
technology
go through all?
special fund.
There's a lot of them.
There's only 4. 2 years ago, you're thinking.
I was thinking of the one-time list.
Yes, the one-time list.
The contingent list was,
Yeah.
four.
So, and this one is a little funky. ADS had requested, if you recall, they had a new billing model. They needed to capitalize the fund that they used to pay for technology services. What ended up happening was in the budget, we funded about half of the requested funds, and then we put funds on the contingent list to free up money in the base operating budget. But this was the first thing that happened with any.
And so we should see
funds.
that 16 million that we put in we shouldn't see those changes in all the agencies' budgets where they were putting their ADS change in their, I don't know if it was in their budget request or their BA, I guess it was in their budget request.
Yeah, the BAA one is a little bit different. This was mostly just capitalize the fund itself because it had a big deficit. So this was put because they were changing the billing model from a look back to a
Right.
less of a look back.
Right, so they should know what in their budgets, what their
Yes.
ADS fees are.
So the next contingent appropriation was $50 million, was appropriated to the Agency of Administration to be transferred by the Emergency Board, subject to 32-133, which I have a slide on what that actually means. While the General Assembly is not in session, in the event of a reduction in federal funds. This is the money that the Emergency Board ends up utilizing later in the fall when the government shut down and the federal government was not going to issue SNAP benefits didn't initially issue SNAP benefits until the government reopened. And then there was $30 million reserved in the general fund for future appropriation or transfer by the General Assembly for addressing federal funding shortfalls. And then another 30 million for federal funding and other stuff. So there was 60 million just reserved in the general fund and 50 actually appropriated to the Agency of Administration.
And all that was reserved because we met that with the contingent list. And only 7 million, 6 point something per SNAP, 7 million.
Yeah, I got a little tape.
Okay.
So this is all of that words. This is just a flow chart. So right, first you fill up the stabilization reserve, then designate the unallocated carry forward to go into 26 to be spent for the budget construct. Then fund the contingency list. Then anything left over to the rainy day fund and retirement funds.
Of that 130.
This 138,
Yeah,
that was when we built the FY 26 budget. We assumed there would be $138 million from FY 25 carried over.
but so like step 4 is of the 138 or
No.
it's of the closeout.
It's whatever's left over after you designate the 138, after you fund the contingency list,
Right, I guess, so, yeah.
which this is what that was. So sort of in that order, right? Carried forward the 138, then funded the contingent list. And after all of that was done, there was almost $1 million that went to the rainy day fund and almost $500,000 that went to each pension fund at the close of 25. All right.
And.
Hmm?
And then there was more.
That was all the money. 25.
Wasn't there additional funds? Oh, because if there is, it all goes to that construct.
It all goes to that construct. Yep.
So where's the 77 million? I think there's nothing about using it for education, but.
We'll get there.
And then at FY 25, then.
FY 26 money. Yeah, we'll get there. Hold on to that one. So we're gonna come back to now, like what happened in the interim. So there's $50 million appropriated to the emergency board. To be transferred, appropriated to the agency administration to be transferred by the emergency board. The next slide gets into like why 50 million and what does that mean? So of that 50 million, 250,000 was transferred to the Vermont Food Bank for a grant to help cover the gap between the normal issuance of SNAP benefits and when the state could issue state funded benefits to SNAP recipients. We also had the so I know what one of the challenges with that what happened at the end of October was that basically the state had to basically set up a new program to issue the state benefit to SNAP beneficiaries, and the administrative work AHS needed about until a week into November to do it. So the grant to the food bank was to help bridge the gap between when those benefits would be issued and when folks wouldn't get their.
They were passed.
They were the best.
Yeah.
Yes, it went to the local food shelves. So the one-time SNAP payments covered 15 days worth of individuals' benefits. There was also administrative costs associated with setting up the program and also letting people know what was going to happen. That was a big component of administrative costs. They could use about up to $100,000 of the 6.3 for that. So of that, there is $43.45 million in that appropriation available for allocation for transfer by the emergency board at this point. I think we'll have some conversation about what to do with this appropriation because it's subject to the session law around reductions in federal funds and making sure that it's language around this appropriation allows for it to, for whatever you want to do with it in the next fiscal year. But of that, so there's about 87% of the funds remaining in that appropriation. So why $50 million? So the emergency board, this is under subpart B, has the authority to transfer appropriations made to other agencies and to use the transferred amount to make expenditures necessitated by unforeseen circumstances. A lot of like historically where we've seen this happen where before Maria Blair retired, what we talked about, this happened kind of in the early 2012, 14-ish area, was with the LIHEAP program, where the purchasing power of the federal grant was not going to be sufficient enough to get people a benefit that was necessary. So what the emergency board did in those instances was transfer money, an appropriation from the Department of Corrections typically, because it's such a big general fund appropriation, to DCF and then backfill that appropriation in the Budget Adjustment Act. So the transfers made by the emergency board shall not exceed 2% of the total general funds appropriations for that year, which We had almost $2.5 billion. 2% of that is almost $50 million. So that's sort of what drove that number. And the emergency board wouldn't be able to transfer more than that $49 million around. So that's why it was only 50 million for that purpose. And then there's the two $30 million tranches that are reserved in the general fund. The only way you can access a reserve is by the General Assembly actively unreserving and appropriating those funds. So we've gotten a lot of questions about, is the governor utilizing these reserves in the Budget Adjustment Act? And the answer is no. There is no language or anything proposed about, at this point, about unreserving those funds. They are for the initial purpose intended.
Can you just remind me, Emily, the 74 point something million that we saw being transferred to the budget in the BAA that they proposed? In my mind, I was thinking that was the leftover from these funds that you're talking about.
Yeah.
What's the relationship there?
So we'll get to that.
Okay.
So a lot of that is from the actual revenue forecast change.
Okay.
But I think
None of this.
it's none of this. And I think part of, like, in terms of the, like, why did it get structured this way? Given that the emergency board can only move $50 million, and the way that the federal funding reduction language was constructed, right? We had a sheet that was like, if a department there were triggers, right? That caused JFC any e-board involvement, and then if it was over and above a certain amount, it would have resulted in the General Assembly needing to come back. Having this money reserved this way, if we had been in a scenario where you all needed to come back into session, you could unreserve these funds to deal with problems as necessary. But it's sort of best way to that we could come up with for that purpose. But that never came to fruition, so it's weird. So that's the contingent list. I don't know if you have any questions, or hopefully all that makes sense. But that's what we did, and that's most of it all still there.
So of that kind of 110 that was set aside, 138 left.
Yeah.
Yep. It's kind of carries forward to what comes.
So the revenue forecast, yeah, another pivot, and hopefully we'll get some. But as a reminder, so the revenue forecast, as we talked about, will be at the emergency board on Friday next week. And just as a reminder, we've used a consensus revenue forecast for a long time. The purpose is to have two independent economists hired by the executive and the legislative branch to propose an agreed upon number for the amount of revenues. And that those numbers are formally adopted. That way we're not debating what the base revenue picture looks like. There are some states where the House comes up with an assumed revenue number, and the Senate comes up with a number, and the governor comes up with a number. And then you have to negotiate how much you have to spend, as well as how much you're going to spend. And this
That's the way it
blocks
used
one
to
side of the
be.
equation. Yeah. And so, so we'll do that again in a week. And then the emergency board is the 4 money chairs and the governor. And it's adopted per statute. It's adopted in January and July. There is a mechanism in the event that Catherine talks about back in 2009, I believe, is when they had to do additional forecasts because of what was going on in the economy. The revenue was going to come close to the forecast, and if you're going to budget to the forecast, you want to make sure that you're, if you have to reduce the forecast so that you can budget to that level, so that you don't over expend. That kind of thing. Hopefully, we. So, and this is the statute around the estimate, right? And it's for the big funds, right? The general fund, the transportation, and the education funds. And yeah, so there will be a forecast for FY26 and FY27. And in January, we do 26, 27, 28, and then in July, it'll just be 27 to 28. And the governor's budget has to be based on the most recently adopted revenue forecast.
So what if he finished his budget before the forecast? He could base it on the July forecast.
I believe Amy and I were in the budget office. That may have happened. And that's,
So if I think there's gonna be a downturn, they might want to get it out ahead of it.
sometimes that happens.
We do that, we've done that more, not in January, but more toward the end of the session. You know that the estimate, you are making the estimates. And you're conveying, and you know that by July it's gonna happen. So that has happened.
And right, yeah, if the actual revenues don't meet the forecast, there are mechanisms for utilizing balance reserve to bring the general fund to balance, like there's.
Is it clear that you use the balance reserve first and then stabilization?
Well, the stabilization, the 5% is an unforeseen ending of the year.
Right. But it seems like even if there is that, you use the balance reserve first.
I can't remember off the top, and there's specific language about when you use the balance reserve. We were just talking to JFO about needing to put a presentation together that specified, like, this is what this one is for, and this is when you touch it, and this is what this one's for, and this is when you, what would trigger those plays.
The 5% is at its base. If you end the year, it is unforeseen.
And then I believe the language is that sort of like the first thing you do in the next year is refill it by.
Yeah,
Right, so we talked about the consensus processes to make sure that we're not arguing about how much is available. The rating agencies cite this as a thing that's important for
every
strong
state,
fiscal management.
every state did the 5% because of the rating agencies in the mid-90s.
And yeah, we already talked about this, the three major funds. It also includes the forecast for payroll tax. That fund is the child care contribution fund. And on the education fund, it's important to note that it's everything but the property taxes. Sales tax, purchase and use, lottery, etc. And it doesn't include, so all of the other special funds that I've read, that's not part of the consensus forecast. So here's the 77 million. This is the chart that comes from Tom Cavet's presentation. This is a comparison of the changes in revenue from the January 2025 forecast to the July 2020 forecast. And blue bar reflects the increase in the forecast for the general fund. So they anticipated, so you built the budget assuming $77 million less in consensus revenue forecast than they anticipated coming in July. So this chart is always at the beginning of those forecasts to show those changes. They also increased it for 2027, but to the extent the 27 budget hasn't been built yet, it sort of is like, it's important to know, but it also doesn't impact anything, practically speaking. And then this is where you see this negative 7.5 in the transportation fund. This is what triggered the transportation fund rescission that was adopted by the Joint Fiscal Committee in August. And then the education fund doesn't have a similar rescission process, and it's sort of dealt with in the next budget year.
You're awesome.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this graph. So the blue bar for 2026 is the change from 2025. So this is just like how much better the economy has done over the year, or it's not within the year how much it shifted.
That's what they project.
Or did
They project to change from the January 25 revenue forecast to the July 25 revenue forecast. And it's the forecast for fiscal 26.
Oh, I see.
See.
Okay, so yep. So then for 27, that is, I guess I'm confused also about like how.
The
So from
economists-
July of last year to January.
This was in July, so it was from January.
From January to
So the economists decided FY 26, which just started in July.
Right.
That we're gonna raise 77 more million than we told you we thought you were gonna raise back in January.
Right.
And 85 million more than the next fiscal year, said you were good.
Okay,
So,
So general fund, because what tax revenue, I think there was gonna be a lot more. Transportation, education.
Is a lot.
But
and so right, if it goes down, then there's a rescission process to realign appropriations with an anticipated lower forecasted revenue. If it goes up, then it's money that's available for the budget adjustment act, basically. So, the governor's, the approximately $120 million changes in the budget adjustment act, this is where 77 of that is coming from, is this updated forecast. When it's updated next week, that available revenue will fluctuate accordingly. And then we'll have to move stuff in the budget adjustment to react to that, or add to it if it goes up. I wouldn't put my money on it going up, but if it did, we could spend. Yeah, so does that make sense? The rest of the money that he's utilizing the budget adjustment act, and we're working on some stuff around it. There's about $24 million of reversions. The fact that the H91 was vetoed, that money fell to the bottom line. So there's some, and then there's some other changes related to that, but that's where their sort of sources. The big chunk of it is the updated forecast. This is what is always at the end of the packets that Tom and Jeff put together. It's always the same sheet, but this is just helpful to see, like, these are all the component units. This is what's changing year over year. This is what the economists are required to present to the emergency board. And this is, what we do a lot of our analysis on, sort of based on what these are. And this is what, whenever the General Assembly is proposing to make a change to one of these tax types, JFO, like the baseline is always what is in these tables. For you're gonna change the rate of sales and use tax, for example, the starting place is always here, and then we would add to it accordingly. And so yeah, there's one for, and there's one, this isn't in here. So at the very top it says available. One of the things when if you're ever find yourself needing to look at these tables, there's a source and then there's available. And the source is because, right, the purchase and use tax is a good example. It goes into the transportation fund, but then statute says allocate part of it to the education fund. So you have sources, meaning as it goes in, and then there's the available is like, okay, but what's really available after all of the statutory allocations occur. Can I give a good example? Oh yeah, so you see sales and use is 0 because now it all goes to the education fund. So you've got same thing, available education fund and available transportation funds. And again, just for, if you're looking for more information on the revenue forecast, you can go to the website. We're trying to make things fancier, but if you go to the, on the front of the website, there's these little bars at the top. Sorry, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Good. So there's this green one for the general fund, the blue one for the education fund, the purple one for the transportation fund. If you click on that chart below will expand, and then you can see when we get actual revenues for the month. We try to update these charts so that you can see how things are tracking year to date. And then also, like with appropriations, if you click on subjects, there's a revenue and taxes subject, and it will bring you to this page, and it has 148 versions of the consensus revenue forecasts if you want to go back in time. And then the monthly revenue tracker if you want to see more detail on how revenue by component unit is tracking for the fiscal year. I think that's everything. That's all the fun stuff we thought you should be reminded of or know before we really get into it.
we don't really know how much is going to be available for the budget because we haven't finished the budget adjustment.
Yeah,
We might use like around it, so we maybe.
I think remember last year we did budget adjustment however many times. That was always the as you move stuff in the Budget Adjustment Act, it's going to impact what's available for the current fiscal year. And we had to keep, as things were moving in one, then we'd have to move it and then we'd have to update the other based on this. So
when you talked about how that 70 whatever 4 million is not being used in the VA, is any of the 110? of the reserve?
No, none of that 110 is
Still reserved.
still, the 60 of it is reserved and the remaining 43, whatever, it was, 42.
We'll assume that is going to be used in the 27th.
maybe. Or you can use it, you can leave it for, I don't.
We could
I don't know
just
that
leave
we're
it
out.
reserved. It's like another stabilization rainy day. We'd have to come up with another name.
Sure can't bring much more.
Snowy day reserve.
Ice day.
Maybe not a good title, right?
Ice day down. Still day. Too soon. Any other questions for JFO?
Thank
I
you.
don't like any questions.
You're welcome.
We got all the JFO staff here.
Nice.
All the best one. We got the best one. Correct?
I won't.
Yeah, okay, thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.